In the humble neighborhood of San Martin, the days began with the cold breeze cutting through the narrow, silent streets. Diego, a 15-year-old boy, woke up early every day to take on responsibilities far greater than someone his age should bear. His mother, Clara, was gravely ill, and he worked tirelessly to provide for their needs. That morning, as he adjusted his faded backpack and slipped on his patched-up sneakers, Diego's gaze lingered on his mother's frail figure, sleeping on a worn-out mattress. "I promise I'll find something better for us, Mom," he murmured, stepping out with a heavy heart. His job as a grocery delivery boy was exhausting, but Diego never complained. He rode his bike through busy streets and up steep hills, braving scorching sun and unexpected rain. Every coin he earned was precious, knowing it went toward his mother's medication. That afternoon, while returning from a long day of deliveries, Diego decided to take a shortcut through a forest that separated his neighborhood from a busier part of the city. The place was known for its tranquility, with rare rays of sunlight filtering through dense tree canopies, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Still, few dared to cross it at night, fearing the unknown. As he pedaled along the dirt path, Diego noticed something unusual by the side of the trail. An electric bike lay toppled over, and beside it was a man lying on the ground. He wore fine clothes, clearly unsuited for such terrain. The man groaned in pain, clutching his ankle with an expression of distress. Diego stopped abruptly and ran toward the man. "Sir, are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. The man opened his eyes with difficulty and replied, I tripped. I think I twisted my ankle." Diego quickly assessed the situation. The man, who appeared to be around 40 years old, was clearly in trouble. "Don't worry, I'll help you," Diego assured him without hesitation. He removed his backpack and searched for anything useful. He wrapped an old shirt around the man's ankle, improvising a support. "Do you live nearby?" Diego asked. The man mumbled, "No, I was just passing through. On my way to a business meeting." His face was pale, and he clearly couldn't get up on his own. "Wait here. I'll go get help," Diego said, but the man grabbed his arm. "Please, don't leave me here alone." The plea in the stranger's voice was undeniable, and Diego couldn't ignore it. "All right, I'll find a way to get you out of here," he promised. Without thinking twice, Diego hoisted the man up with effort, supporting him on his shoulder. "The main road isn't far. We can find help there." Every step was a struggle. The man, whose name Diego still didn't know, was heavy, and the uneven path made things even more difficult. But Diego pressed on, ignoring the pain in his shoulders and the sweat dripping from his brow. After several grueling minutes, they reached the main road. To Diego's relief, a car was approaching. He waved frantically, and the vehicle came to a stop. An elderly man stepped out, taking in the scene with surprise. "What happened here?" he asked. Diego quickly explained, and the man agreed to take the injured stranger to the hospital. As they helped load the man into the car, Diego heard a faint whisper, "Thank you, boy." Diego simply smiled. "Do whatever it takes to get better, sir." And with that, the car drove off, leaving Diego alone on the road. He knew he still had a long way back home, but despite the exhaustion, he felt an odd sense of satisfaction. Something about that afternoon had shifted inside him, though he couldn't quite name what. The warm glow of the setting sun painted the sky with hues of orange and purple as Diego returned home. His shoulders ached from the weight of the groceries he had delivered throughout the day, and his legs felt heavy with exhaustion. Still, he was determined to make it back before nightfall. The shortcut through the forest had always been his way of saving precious time, but today felt different. The stillness of the forest seemed almost eerie, broken only by the crunch of leaves beneath his worn sneakers and the occasional chirp of distant birds. Halfway through the path, Diego noticed a figure lying motionless on the ground near a toppled electric bike. His heart skipped a beat. He stopped abruptly, gripping the straps of his backpack tightly as he observed the scene from a distance. The figure groaned, and Diego realized it was a man clearly in distress. Taking a deep breath, he approached cautiously. The man was dressed in a white button-up shirt and gray slacks, clothes that didn't belong in a forest path. His ankle was swollen, and he clutched it tightly, wincing with pain. Sweat glistened on his pale face, and his breathing was shallow. "Sir, are you okay?" Diego's voice wavered as he knelt beside the man. The man opened his eyes slightly, his face contorted with pain. I fell off the bike. My ankle. I think it's broken." Diego's eyes scanned the man's injury. The swelling was severe, and the man's movements were limited. "You need help," Diego said, his voice steadying. "Can you stand?" "No," the man groaned, shaking his head. "I can't put weight on it." Diego looked around. The dirt path was deserted, and the nearest road was a good distance away. He thought quickly, then slipped off his backpack and rummaged through it. Pulling out an old t-shirt, he wrapped it around the man's ankle, improvising a support. "This might help stabilize it for now," he said. The man nodded weakly. His breathing still labored. "Thank you," he murmured. "Stay here. I'll go get help," Diego said, rising to his feet. "No," the man's voice was firm despite his pain. "Don't leave me here, please." Diego hesitated. The desperation in the man's voice was clear. Leaving him alone didn't feel right. "All right," he said finally. "Let's get you to the main road. Maybe we can find someone there." The man gave a faint nod, and Diego crouched down beside him. "Put your arm around my shoulder," he instructed. The man complied, grimacing with every movement. Diego wrapped his arm around the man's waist and, with a grunt, helped him to his feet. The journey to the road was grueling. The man leaned heavily on Diego, and every step was a test of the boy's strength. The uneven path didn't make things any easier, and Diego's breath grew labored as he struggled to keep them both upright. You're just a kid," the man said between gasps of pain. "Why are you doing this?" Diego didn't answer immediately. He tightened his grip on the man and focused on putting one foot in front of the other. "Because you need help," he said simply. "And I can help." The man fell silent, his weight growing heavier with every step. Diego's muscles burned, but he pushed forward, determined to reach the road. As they neared the edge of the forest, the distant sound of a car engine brought a surge of relief. "Hold on," Diego said, his voice strained. He helped the man sit on a fallen log near the road and waved frantically at the approaching car. The vehicle slowed to a stop, and an elderly driver rolled down his window. "What's going on here?" the man asked, stepping out of the car. "This man is injured," Diego explained quickly. "He needs to get to a hospital." The driver nodded, glancing at the man's swollen ankle. "Let's get him in the car," he said. Together, they lifted the injured man and settled him into the back seat. As the driver prepared to leave, the man looked at Diego, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said softly. Diego offered a small smile. "Take care of yourself, sir." He stepped back as the car drove off, the taillights disappearing into the distance. Alone on the road, Diego exhaled deeply and adjusted his backpack. The sun had almost set, and the shadows of the forest loomed behind him. Despite the aching in his body, Diego felt a quiet satisfaction. He had done what he could, and that was enough for now. As the car sped down the narrow dirt road, the injured man lay in the back seat, his breath shallow and face pale. Diego sat beside him, his hands fidgeting nervously in his lap. The elderly driver, a man with kind eyes and a weathered face, glanced at the two through the rearview mirror. "We're almost at the hospital," the driver assured them, his voice calm despite the urgency in his driving. Diego nodded, his mind racing. He looked at the man's swollen ankle, the makeshift support he had fashioned earlier barely holding. "Hang in there, sir," he said softly. The man opened his eyes slightly, his voice weak but sincere. "You didn't have to do all this for me." "Why?" Diego hesitated, glancing out the window at the darkening sky. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "Everyone needs help sometimes." The man's lips curved into a faint smile before he closed his eyes again, his body succumbing to the pain and exhaustion. Diego's chest tightened. He had seen that look before in his mother's face when her illness flared up. It was a look of vulnerability, of helplessness. "How much farther?" Diego asked, his voice more urgent now. 10 minutes, maybe less," the driver replied, pressing his foot harder on the accelerator. "I'll get us there as fast as I can." The road ahead was rough, filled with potholes and patches of uneven dirt. The car jolted with every bump, and Diego held onto the injured man to keep him steady. The driver's old sedan creaked and groaned, but it held firm, pushing forward through the treacherous terrain. "Stay awake," Diego urged, shaking the man gently. "Don't fall asleep." The man stirred, opening his eyes briefly. "I'm trying," he murmured, his voice barely audible. As the car crested a small hill, the faint lights of the hospital came into view. Relief flooded Diego's face. "There it is. We're almost there," he said, gripping the man's shoulder reassuringly. The driver honked the horn as they pulled up to the emergency entrance. A group of medical staff rushed out with a stretcher, their faces focused and professional. Diego jumped out of the car, helping them carefully transfer the man onto the stretcher. "He's got a bad ankle injury," Diego explained quickly. "He's been in pain for a while now. We'll take it from here," one of the nurses said, giving Diego a reassuring nod before wheeling the man inside. For a moment, Diego stood frozen, his chest heaving from the adrenaline of the past hour. The elderly driver placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "You did good, kid," he said with a small smile. Diego nodded, his gaze fixed on the hospital doors. He wasn't sure if the man would be okay, but he felt a sense of accomplishment. He had done everything he could. "Do you need a ride home?" the driver asked. Diego shook his head. "No, I can manage." "Thank you for stopping to help." The driver tipped his hat and got back into his car, the engine rumbling to life. As the vehicle disappeared into the night, Diego took a deep breath and began walking. The road back to his neighborhood was long, but his steps felt lighter now. The events of the evening played over in his mind. The man's gratitude, the driver's kindness, the rush to get help each moment reminded him of the importance of human connection. Despite the exhaustion creeping into his limbs, Diego felt a spark of hope ignite within him. As the stars began to dot the sky, Diego's resolve grew stronger. He didn't know the man's name or his story, but he knew this. In a world that often felt harsh and unforgiving, every act of kindness mattered. And tonight, he had been part of something that truly made a difference. The next morning, Diego awoke to the familiar hum of the neighborhood. The events of the previous evening felt like a blur, yet vivid moments flashed in his mind. The man's pale face, the rush to the hospital, and the driver's reassuring words. His body ached from exhaustion, but there was no time to rest. Clara, his mother, needed him. After a quick breakfast of bread and coffee, Diego left the house to check on the grocery shop where he worked. As he walked through the narrow streets, neighbors greeted him warmly, unaware of his adventure the night before. At the shop, the owner, Don Alberto, noticed Diego's sluggish movements. "You look like you've been through the ringer, kid," he said, handing Diego a broom. "Take it easy today. We'll manage." Diego nodded gratefully and started sweeping the front of the shop. His mind wandered to the injured man. He wondered if the man was still at the hospital, and whether he had family or friends who had come to see him. The thought lingered, stirring a strange mix of worry and pride within him. By midday, Diego decided to visit the hospital. He didn't know why he felt compelled to check on the man, but something about their brief encounter had left a mark on him. He borrowed a bicycle from a friend and made his way to the hospital, navigating the bustling streets of the city. The hospital lobby was a stark contrast to the tranquility of his neighborhood. The sharp smell of disinfectant filled the air, and the sound of hurried footsteps echoed off the walls. Diego approached the reception desk hesitantly. "Excuse me," he began, his voice unsure. I brought a man here last night. He had an injured ankle. Do you know if he's okay?" The receptionist, a kind-looking woman with glasses, typed something into her computer. "Do you know his name?" she asked. Diego shook his head. "No, but he was brought in from the forest road. He's around 40, wearing a white shirt and gray pants." The woman's fingers tapped across the keyboard. After a moment, she looked up. "He's in room 312. He's stable now. You can visit him if you'd like." Diego's heart raced as he made his way to the room. When he reached the door, He hesitated for a moment before gently knocking. "Come in." A weak voice called from inside. Pushing the door open, Diego saw the man propped up in bed, his ankle in a cast and a tray of untouched food on the bedside table. Despite his pale complexion, the man's expression brightened upon seeing Diego. "It's you," the man said, his voice laced with surprise. "The boy who helped me." Diego stepped inside, feeling slightly awkward. "I just wanted to see if you're okay," he said. The man chuckled softly, wincing at the movement. "Thanks to you, I am. The doctor said I was lucky you acted so quickly." Diego smiled shyly, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I'm glad you're all right. Do you have someone coming to see you?" The man's expression faltered for a moment before he shook his head. "Not yet. My family's far away, and work keeps me on the road most of the time." Diego frowned slightly but nodded. "If you need anything, I can help. I don't have much, but—" The man interrupted him with a warm smile. "You've already done more than enough. What's your name, kid?" "Diego," he replied. "I'm Emilio," the man said, extending a hand. Diego shook it carefully, mindful of Emilio's fragile state. They talked for a while, their conversation flowing easily, despite their differences. Diego shared stories of his neighborhood and his mother, while Emilio spoke of his travels and his work in the city. Though brief, their exchange left an impression on both of them. As Diego prepared to leave, Emilio called out to him. "Diego, wait." He turned, eyebrows raised in question. "Thank you," Emilio said earnestly. "Not just for helping me, but for caring." Diego nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Take care, Mr. Emilio." As he walked out of the hospital, the sun was high in the sky, casting a warm light over the bustling streets. For the first time in a long while, Diego felt a sense of connection to something bigger than himself. He had made a difference, however small, and that thought filled him with a quiet pride. A week had passed since Diego had last seen Emilio. Life had returned to its usual rhythm, but the memory of that night lingered in his mind. Diego's days were consumed by work and caring for his mother, yet he often found himself wondering how Emilio was doing. He didn't expect to see the man again. Their worlds seemed too far apart. That changed one sunny afternoon when a sleek black car rolled into the narrow street of Diego's neighborhood. The vehicle stood out sharply against the modest homes and cobbled roads. Diego, who was sweeping the front of Don Alberto's shop, stopped mid-motion as the car pulled up in front of him. The tinted window lowered, revealing Emilio's familiar face. "Diego," Emilio called out, a warm smile spreading across his face. Diego blinked in surprise, his grip tightening on the broom. "Mr. Emilio?" he stammered. "What are you doing here?" Emilio opened the car door, stepping out carefully with the aid of a crutch. His ankle was still in a cast, but he moved with determination. "I came to see you," he said simply. Diego glanced around, noticing the curious stares of neighbors. "Me? Why?" Emilio leaned against the car, his expression serious. "Because I owe you. You saved my life, Diego. That's not something I can forget." Diego's cheeks flushed, and he looked down at the ground. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," Emilio said firmly. "Most people wouldn't have gone out of their way to help a stranger. You did. And now, it's my turn to help you." Before Diego could respond, Emilio gestured to the driver, who stepped out and opened the trunk of the car. Inside were several boxes filled with food, clothing, and medical supplies. Diego's eyes widened as the driver began unloading them onto the street. "What is this?" Diego asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "For you and your mother," Emilio replied. "I asked around and learned about your situation. This is the least I can do." Diego shook his head, taking a step back. "I can't accept this. It's too much." Emilio placed a hand on Diego's shoulder, his gaze steady. "It's not too much. It's what you deserve. Please, let me do this." Diego's resistance faltered under Emilio's sincerity. He glanced at the boxes, imagining the relief they would bring to his mother. After a long moment, he nodded. "Thank you," he said softly. As the supplies were brought into Diego's home, neighbors gathered, murmuring among themselves. Clara, frail but smiling, greeted Emilio warmly. She clasped his hand in hers, her voice trembling with gratitude. "You're an angel, Mr. Emilio. Thank you for helping my boy." Emilio shook his head. "Your boy is the angel. I'm just trying to repay a small part of what he did for me." The visit stretched into the evening, with Emilio sharing stories of his travels and Diego showing him the small garden he and his mother tended. For the first time in a long while, laughter filled their home. As Emilio prepared to leave, he turned to Diego. "I'll be back soon. There's more I want to do for you and your mother. But in the meantime, if you ever need anything, you call me. Promise?" Diego nodded, clutching the small piece of paper Emilio handed him with a phone number written on it. "I promise." As the black car disappeared down the street, Diego stood by the door, the paper still in his hand. The weight of Emilio's kindness was overwhelming, but it also sparked a new sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things were starting to change for the better. True to his word, Emilio returned the following week. This time, he arrived with a plan and a purpose that extended beyond simply repaying Diego for his kindness. As the sleek black car rolled into the neighborhood again, the excitement among the residents was palpable. It wasn't every day that someone like Emilio visited their humble streets. Diego was at home, helping his mother water the small garden, when a knock at the door interrupted them. Clara gave him a knowing smile. "It's him," she said softly. Diego opened the door to find Emilio standing there, a crutch still under one arm, but looking more composed. Beside him was a young woman holding a leather briefcase. "Diego," Emilio greeted warmly. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Mr. Emilio," Diego replied, stepping aside to let them in. "Please, come in." Once inside, Emilio introduced the woman as Marta, his assistant. Marta smiled politely and handed Diego a folder. "Mr. Emilio asked me to prepare some plans that might interest you," she explained. Diego furrowed his brow as he opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents inside. They detailed ideas for community projects, a local food bank, a tutoring program for children, and a small workshop for job training. "What is this?" Diego asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Emilio leaned forward, his gaze intent. "This is what I want to do for your neighborhood. You inspired me, Diego. When you helped me, you reminded me that people here deserve opportunities, just like anyone else. I want to create something meaningful, but I need your help to make it work." Clara, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "This is incredible," she said, her voice full of emotion. "But why us? Why here?" Emilio smiled. "Because I've been where you are. I grew up in a place like this. Someone gave me a chance once, and it changed my life. Now I want to do the same for others." Diego's mind raced. The ideas Emilio presented were ambitious, but practical. He couldn't deny how much they could help his neighbors. Yet, the thought of being involved in something so big felt daunting. I don't know what to say," Diego admitted. "Say you'll think about it," Emilio said gently. "I don't expect you to decide right away, but you're a natural leader, Diego. People trust you. They look up to you. With your help, we can make this work." Diego nodded slowly, the weight of the proposal settling over him. "I'll think about it," he said, his voice steady. For the rest of the afternoon, Emilio and Marta stayed, discussing the plans in more detail. They answered Clara's questions and listened to Diego's concerns. By the time they left, the small home felt charged with a new sense of possibility. As the black car disappeared down the street once more, Diego sat on the steps outside his house, the folder still in his hands. His neighbors approached, curious and excited, asking questions about Emilio's visit. Diego did his best to explain, though part of him still struggled to grasp the enormity of what had just happened. That night, as he lay in bed, Diego thought about the path that had brought Emilio into his life. A simple act of kindness had set off a chain of events he could never have predicted. Now, he stood at the edge of something much larger than himself. For the first time, Diego didn't feel overwhelmed by the challenges ahead. Instead, he felt a spark of hope, a sense that together they could build something lasting. Tomorrow, he decided he would talk to his neighbors and start laying the foundation for the changes Emilio envisioned. The days following Emilio's visit were a whirlwind for Diego. The folder filled with plans and possibilities had sparked endless conversations among the neighbors. Diego found himself at the center of discussions, with people looking to him for guidance and direction. Despite his initial hesitation, Diego realized he couldn't ignore the growing momentum. Emilio's proposal was more than just a generous gesture. It was a chance to transform their neighborhood. But with opportunity came responsibility, and Diego felt the weight of it pressing on him. One morning, as he was gathering ideas from a group of neighbors outside the small local market, Emilio's car pulled up once again. This time, Emilio stepped out without his crutch, moving with greater ease. His arrival brought a hush to the crowd, but his warm smile quickly put everyone at ease. "Good morning, everyone," Emilio greeted. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Diego replied, stepping forward. "We were just talking about your plans." Emilio's eyes sparkled with interest. "That's exactly why I'm here. I wanted to share something that might help." He gestured to Marta, who was carrying a stack of notebooks and pens. "These are for all of you," Emilio said. "I've arranged for a series of workshops to help us organize and implement the projects. Leadership, teamwork, and resource management skills that will make a real difference." The neighbors exchanged curious looks as Marta handed out the supplies. Diego's curiosity grew as Emilio continued. "And Diego, I'd like you to join me for the first session. It'll give you the tools to lead these efforts effectively." Diego's heart raced. The idea of stepping into a leadership role both excited and intimidated him. He hesitated, but the encouraging looks from his neighbors pushed him to nod. "I'll do it," he said firmly. The workshop took place in a small community center a few streets away. Emilio led the session with an energy and passion that captivated everyone. He used stories from his own experiences to illustrate the importance of collaboration and adaptability. Diego listened intently, scribbling notes in his notebook. At one point, Emilio addressed Diego directly. "Leadership isn't about having all the answers," he said. "It's about listening, learning, and empowering others to succeed. You've already shown that you care about this community. Now it's time to take the next step." Diego met Emilio's gaze, feeling a mixture of pride and apprehension. "What if I make mistakes?" he asked. "You will," Emilio replied with a reassuring smile. "But every mistake is a lesson, and you won't be doing this alone. We're all in this together." The session ended with applause, and Diego felt a newfound confidence stirring within him. The discussions had opened his eyes to the possibilities of what they could achieve as a community. Over the following weeks, the neighborhood buzzed with activity. Inspired by the workshops, Diego and his neighbors began laying the groundwork for the projects. They turned an abandoned lot into a small garden, organized a collection drive for the food bank, and set up a tutoring space in a vacant room at the local school. Diego found himself thriving in his new role. He coordinated efforts, mediated disputes, and encouraged others to share their ideas. Emilio's lessons played in his mind constantly, guiding his decisions and helping him navigate the challenges. One evening, as Diego stood in the newly planted garden, Clara approached him. Her face was lit with pride, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're doing something incredible, Diego," she said softly. "I've never seen the neighborhood so alive." Diego looked around at the vibrant scene, children laughing as they watered plants, adults chatting as they planned the next steps, and felt a swell of gratitude. "It's not just me, Em," he replied. "It's everyone. We're all making this happen together." That night, as Diego sat down to jot his thoughts in the notebook Emilio had given him, he realized just how much had changed. The boy who had once felt overwhelmed by life's challenges now felt a sense of purpose and belonging. He was no longer just a helper, he was a leader, and his community was stronger because of it. The community projects had gained momentum, and the once overlooked neighborhood of San Martin was beginning to transform. The garden thrived with fresh vegetables, the food bank was stocked with essentials, and children's laughter filled the tutoring space. Diego could feel the pride swelling within him as he saw his neighbors working together, their spirits lifted by the changes. However, progress came with its own set of challenges. One afternoon, as Diego was overseeing the distribution of food at the bank, Marta arrived with a worried expression. She handed him a sheet of paper and notice from the city council. "They're reviewing the use of this building," Marta explained. "It seems someone filed a complaint, claiming it's not up to code." Diego's heart sank. The food bank had become a lifeline for many families, and losing it would be a devastating blow. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "What can we do?" he asked. "We'll need to appeal," Marta said, "but it'll take time. Meanwhile, we should start looking for alternative spaces, just in case." Diego nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "I'll talk to Emilio. Maybe he'll have some ideas." Later that evening, Diego met Emilio at the community center, where a workshop was wrapping up. Emilio listened attentively as Diego explained the situation, his expression thoughtful. "This isn't unusual," Emilio said finally. "Whenever there's progress, there's resistance. But that doesn't mean we stop. We'll figure this out together." The next few days were a blur of activity. Diego and his neighbors worked tirelessly to gather information and organize their appeal. They held meetings to brainstorm solutions, and Emilio used his connections to consult with legal experts. The community rallied behind the effort, determined to protect what they had built. Diego's role as a leader became even more critical during this time. He spent hours reassuring worried neighbors, coordinating tasks, and making sure everyone stayed focused. Despite the stress, he found strength in their unity. A week later, Diego and a small group of representatives, including Marta and Emilio, presented their case to the city council. Diego stood at the podium, his hands gripping the edges tightly. The room was filled with officials, their faces unreadable as they listened to his words. "This food bank isn't just a building," Diego said, his voice steady but passionate. "It's a symbol of what we can achieve when we come together. It's a lifeline for families who are struggling, a place where hope grows alongside the food we share. We're not asking for much, just the chance to keep making a difference." When he finished, the room was silent for a moment before Emilio stepped forward to provide additional context and support. His calm and persuasive words reinforced Diego's plea, and Marta's detailed presentation highlighted the positive impact the food bank had already made. The council members deliberated for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the head of the council spoke. "We recognize the importance of your work and the impact it's had on your community. However, certain issues need to be addressed to bring the building up to code. If you can meet these requirements within 3 months, the food bank can remain operational." Relief swept through the group, and Diego felt his knees weaken slightly. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a chance when they were determined to seize. Back in the neighborhood, the news was met with cheers and renewed determination. Work began immediately to address the council's requirements. Emilio brought in professionals to help with repairs, while neighbors volunteered their time and skills. Diego was at the center of it all, leading by example and keeping everyone motivated. One evening, as the sun set over the bustling garden, Emilio pulled Diego aside. "You're handling this better than most adults would," he said with a grin. Diego chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. "I'm just doing what needs to be done, and that's what makes you a leader," Emilio said. "Remember, challenges like this don't define us. How we respond to them does." Diego nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. As he looked around at his neighbors working together, he realized that the fight to save the food bank wasn't just about a building. It was about proving what they could achieve when they stood together. And for that, he was willing to give everything he had. The efforts to bring the food bank up to code united the neighborhood in ways Diego hadn't imagined. From sunrise to sunset, the streets buzzed with activity. Volunteers of all ages contributed their time, expertise, and resources to ensure the project's success. For the first time in years, San Martin felt alive with a shared purpose. Diego found himself at the heart of it all. He managed schedules, coordinated tasks, and made sure everyone stayed motivated. Despite the long days and challenges, he never wavered. Emilio's lessons on leadership echoed in his mind, reminding him to listen, adapt, and empower others. One afternoon, as Diego worked alongside a group repairing the roof of the food bank, a familiar figure approached. It was Don Roberto, a local businessman known for his aloof demeanor and reluctance to engage with the community. He carried a toolbox and wore an expression of quiet determination. "I heard you could use some help," Don Roberto said, his voice gruff but sincere. Diego blinked in surprise, but quickly recovered. "We'd be grateful for it," he replied, offering a welcoming smile. The sight of Don Roberto joining the effort sparked a ripple of excitement among the volunteers. His presence sent a powerful message. Even those who had been distant were now stepping forward to support the cause. It was a testament to how far they had come as a community. As the weeks passed, progress on the food bank was evident. Crumbling walls were reinforced, faulty wiring was replaced, and new shelves were installed. Emilio's connections proved invaluable, bringing in professionals to tackle the more technical challenges. Meanwhile, Diego's neighbors poured their hearts into the work, turning the once neglected building into a symbol of hope. One evening, as the final touches were being made, Diego stood back to admire the transformation. The food bank was almost unrecognizable, now a bright and welcoming space ready to serve the community. His chest swelled with pride, but he also felt a twinge of nervousness. The city council's inspection was only days away, and everything hinged on their approval. The day of the inspection arrived, and tension hung thick in the air. Diego, Emilio, and a group of volunteers waited outside the food bank as the inspectors walked through the building, clipboards in hand. Every creak of the floorboards and murmur of conversation felt magnified. When the inspectors finally emerged, their leader, a stern-looking woman with glasses, approached the group. She glanced at her clipboard, then at the food bank before speaking. "You've done an impressive job," she said, her tone neutral but professional. "The building meets all the necessary requirements. The food bank can remain operational." Cheers erupted from the crowd. Diego felt a wave of relief and joy wash over him as he exchanged hugs and handshakes with his neighbors. Emilio clapped him on the shoulder, a proud smile on his face. "You did it, Diego," Emilio said. "We did it," Diego corrected, his eyes shining with gratitude. The reopening of the food bank was celebrated with a community event that evening. Tables were set up with homemade dishes. Children performed songs, and neighbors shared stories of the journey that had brought them to this moment. Laughter and music filled the air, and for the first time in a long while, San Martin felt whole. As Diego stood amidst the celebration, Clara approached him, her eyes brimming with pride. "You've done something truly remarkable, Mijo," she said, wrapping him in a hug. "Your father would be so proud." Diego's throat tightened, and he blinked back tears. "I couldn't have done it without everyone's help," he replied. Later that night, as the festivities wound down, Diego found himself sitting with Emilio under the stars. The older man handed him a small notebook. "This is for you," Emilio said, "to record your thoughts, ideas, and dreams. Leadership doesn't stop here, Diego. This is just the beginning." Diego accepted the notebook with a smile, flipping through its blank pages. "Thank you, Emilio, for everything." "No, thank you," Emilio replied. "You reminded me of what really matters," as the stars twinkled above them. Diego felt a sense of peace and possibility. The challenges they had faced had only strengthened their bond as a community, and he knew that together they could overcome anything. The morning sun bathed the neighborhood of San Martin in a golden glow, reflecting the renewed spirit of its people. The food bank stood as a proud symbol of their collective effort, its doors open and bustling with activity. For Diego, the past few months felt like a lifetime, a journey of challenges, growth, and triumph. As he walked through the streets, neighbors greeted him with smiles and waves. Children played in the community garden, and volunteers worked together to stock shelves and assist families. Diego's heart swelled with pride as he realized how much they had accomplished together. Inside the food bank, Emilio was overseeing the distribution of supplies. When he spotted Diego, he waved him over. "Good morning, Diego," he said, his voice warm. "How does it feel to see all of this?" Diego glanced around, taking in the laughter and collaboration. "It feels incredible," he admitted. "I never imagined we could come this far." Emilio placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's because of you," he said. "You've shown this community what's possible when we work together." Later that afternoon, a small ceremony was held to celebrate the official reopening of the food bank. Clara stood proudly among the crowd, her eyes shining as Diego was called up to speak. Emilio introduced him with a heartfelt speech, praising his courage and leadership. As Diego stepped up to the microphone, he felt a wave of nerves. But as he looked out at the familiar faces of his neighbors, he found his voice. "This food bank isn't just a building," he began. "It's a testament to what we can achieve when we believe in each other. Every brick, every shelf, and every box of food represents the strength of our community. We've proven that together we can overcome anything." The crowd erupted into applause, and Diego's chest filled with a mix of pride and gratitude. He spotted Clara wiping away tears and smiled at her, knowing how much this moment meant to her as well. As the celebration continued into the evening, Diego found a quiet moment to reflect. Sitting on a bench near the garden, he opened the notebook Emilio had given him and began to write. He jotted down ideas for future projects, expanding the tutoring program, organizing health workshops, and creating spaces for art and music. Emilio joined him, sitting down with a contented sigh. "Planning your next steps already?" he asked with a grin. Diego nodded. "There's still so much we can do. I don't want to stop now," Emilio chuckled. "That's the spirit. But don't forget to take a moment to appreciate what you've already achieved. You've built something lasting here, Diego." That's no small feat. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the neighborhood celebrated. The bonds formed during their journey had created a sense of unity that would endure long after the festivities ended. Months later, as the seasons changed and the projects grew, San Martin flourished. The food bank became a cornerstone of the community, providing not just sustenance, but hope. Diego continued to lead with the same determination and compassion that had brought them this far. One day, as he walked past the garden, he overheard a group of children talking excitedly about their dreams for the future. Their words reminded him of why he had started this journey in the first place. "Leadership is about planting seeds," Emilio had told him once. "You may not always see the fruits of your labor right away, but they will grow." Looking around at the vibrant neighborhood, Diego knew those seeds had taken root. He wasn't just leading a community, he was helping to build a legacy of hope that would inspire generations to come. What lesson did this incredible story bring to you? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to Golden Stories and leave a like. We pour so much care and dedication into creating each story, and your support is what inspires us to keep bringing heartfelt and inspiring content. Check out more videos on our channel and be a part of this journey with us. Thank you for being part of our community, and we'll see you in the next story.